working on the tail again. I managed to pop out during the week and I got more panel pins, and I've made a little template thing. I 3D printed this, and this is so that I can trim what's in there, trim the edges, or the corners rather, so that I have a nice radius curve there, so there are no stress points, but this will go all the way down into the timber, into the corner. On this other corner, you can see that lets you get it right into the corner, and then when I mark around it, I can trim that out and I'll be able to hammer these edges over. That's how that thing works. I need to get a new piece of glass for my 3D printer. It's had so many bits stuck to it, little chunks of glass have actually broken out of it, so I don't have a smooth surface anymore. But all I'll do is mark around that now with a pen, and then I can sort of trim those out. Not sure the best way to actually cut those out. Probably with my little hand notcher will be the best way. And somebody left a comment, a very useful comment, around these connectors and about the solid pins, and that you shouldn't use those where there's likely to be any vibration because there's no cable support. So you need to use the other sort of crimps, the standard sort of crimps. I don't have any handy, where I've got some in there somewhere, where it crimps the actual insulation as well as the conductors. So I've ordered some of those. I don't know how long they'll take to get here, so I may not have them for my Christmas break, which means I can't do the wiring. Still waiting for the little junction boxes. They're actually coming from Germany by the looks of it. And I haven't heard about the aluminium. So there's a couple of jobs I do need to do. One, I need to make some bump stops for the front axle, and those will just basically be little plates. I've already kind of got a little plate in there that kind of goes in there and has a piece of rubber on it. So those I'll need to do. Just notice that paint's a bit scratched. That's okay. And given I don't have anything else I can do on the car, it might now be time to look at taking it apart and painting the chassis, because I think I've pretty much got all of the holes that I need. I think everything is there now in place. So there's no more holes to be drilled. If I have to drill more holes, of course, I can always do that and then touch up the paint. This is a blank number plate I made up. This is the size of the plates I have, because I will have to figure out where I'm going to mount that. I'm suspecting it'll have to go down here somewhere, maybe. Not quite sure how that's going to work. Once I have the tail back on there, because that means it would be down here. There's no good place to mount it where you can see it, unless you do it sort of Austin 7 style and mounted it up here. But I don't really want to do that. Similar problem at the front. It'll probably have to be mounted on little brackets that stand it off like that, and this would have to swing out of the way so you can get to the starter if you needed to. Or I could mount it on the on that bar that goes across here, but I've actually taken that out because that's right in the way of the dynamo. With that bar in there, you can't get the starter handle in place. So again, that's going to need a little bit of thought, but once I've got the body on there, that'll make more sense. Finished bashing over the boot lid. You can see how I've done the corners now. Generous radius on them. I just touched up the paint where I'd actually accidentally hit the timber. The edges are pinned, but I haven't bothered pinning along here. Doesn't really need it. It's not going to go anywhere. So rather than drilling more holes and putting in more things that could rust, I'll just leave those alone. I'll still need to just touch up some of the welds right on the edges where they have cracked a little bit, where I've hammered it over. So quick touch up there. I was worried about burning the timber, but of course it's underneath there, so you won't see it anyway. And I've also put in all the remaining pins that need to go in the bottom, and I did weigh it. So, well, I actually weighed myself holding it, and it turns out this weighs 30 kg. So, the boot lid still needs a little bit of tweaking, but it's pretty close. And of course, once that's strapped down, that should be fine, I think. It's a bit rough because this was my scuttle that went wrong that I've reused. So you can see how this is fitting, how the edges are up, which means it needs a little bit more curve along that bottom edge. Oops. That's the number of times I've whacked my shins into these dumb irons. Maybe that's why they call them dumb irons, because it's a really dumb thing to do, to walk into them. But, yeah, this one too needs a little bit more shape, but it's pretty close. And the other thing I need to do while I've got it off the car is I'll make a floor. I might use a piece of 2mm aluminium for that. It'll just be cut to fit and screwed in. Stainless steel screws. Stainless steel and aluminium sort of don't play well together because they're dissimilar metals, but if the piece of aluminium is very big and the screws are very small, there shouldn't really be a problem. And I'm using my red oxide goopy stuff, Rescue Steel, which is specifically for dissimilar metals like that. But I'm pretty pleased with how that's come out. Again, not perfect, but good enough. It'll look like a proper car. Today after work, I have been working on the tail, the boot cover. That's fitting really well now, and I gave it a bit of a sand. It's a little bit rough. You can see, if you get the light just right, you can see the track marks in it, but that's okay. I'll live with that. Once it's actually got a strap holding it down, it pulls down really nicely all the way around. So I think what I'm going to do is fold a it'll be a probably 3/8 of an inch flange all the way around, maybe 1/2 an inch. And I think what I'll do is I'll leave a sort of lip there so I can put that rubber under that edge, and the rubber is just there so it doesn't scratch. Still need to do the welding, and I also sanded these back a little bit just so that this strip here is consistent all the way around, and so there's no sharp corner there, because especially on the driver's side, this is basically right where your elbow goes, so you don't want any sharp edges there. So what I'll do now is touch up the stain, just the black stain, and I think then the boot lid is almost done, or the tail is almost done, and I still need to, I'll get a piece of cardboard and I'll trace out the pattern underneath here, because if you look at the back of the car, this floor wraps up to here, the under tray. So I need to have a floor sort of from there back, and that basically matches up with here. So it's just a sort of triangular piece. I do need to knock in some of those nails there. I can feel the nail heads, so they need a little bit more tapping down. And that tail floor will just be screwed into place. If I've got a big enough piece of 1.6, I'll use that. Otherwise I've got some 2mm. Of course, the offcuts are almost always exactly the wrong size, and I don't think any of those will fit. It'll be too small. Yeah, definitely. So that's something I still need to do, and the other part of the body I need to make are the little side pieces, the little strips that will go along this edge, and it just gets folded and tacked in place, just to make this all even when it's painted. So I think I'm going to do that black stain next. Back onto the Riley now. I've trimmed a blank, it's 2mm aluminium, which will go underneath the tail, something like that. Because I traced around the edge, I need to trim it to make it sit inside the tail a little bit. So probably about 1/8 of an inch or 1/4 of an inch around, and then I'll screw through that into the base. So there's that, and I've been drilling the holes where the guard stays go through, and this is how my little guide works. Although I did have a problem with it, which was I forgot to lubricate the drill bit. But the way this works is these are the mounting points for the guard stays, and I made this little sort of guide that sits into the bracket, and then with a 1/4 inch drill bit you can drill through that, and shouldn't really leave the drill like that, but through that and right through the body. So that hole is now perfectly lined up with that mounting point. Same there, same down there. And what I'll do now is I will drill through from the outside with a hole saw, using a 1-inch hole saw. This tubing is 3/4 inch, 19mm, and then what I will do is use rubber grommets through the body, through the aluminium that the stays will actually go through. And those are standard sizes, 19mm inside diameter, 25 outer, so that should fit pretty well. But what I'll do is, you can see when I forgot to lubricate the drill bit, and the drill bit's only just long enough to get through, and there was a little burr or something at the end, and it ended up sort of friction welding itself to this, and it took quite a bit of struggling. I took this out of the car, put this in the vise, to try and get this drill bit unstuck from there, and you can see where the chuck has munted up the end of the drill there. This was an old drill though, so that's okay. For the hole saw, normally what you do is you have the drill bit in the middle as the guide. Because I've already got the hole, what I will do is make up or cut a piece of 1/4 inch steel rod, and I'll use that instead of the drill bit. And then there's no danger of the edge of the cutting flutes on the drill bit digging into the aluminium and pulling it sideways. That hole is now literally just a guide hole for a smooth piece of rod. And I find that works a lot better for cutting the holes. But this is aluminium, those were my test cuts. And if it slips, you do get a bit of a jagged edge. If it works okay, it's not too bad. They're never perfect, but again, there's rubber grommet is going to cover all of that. This is how you can see it. Done drilling through from the other side. So that's a piece of 1/4 inch rod, and with the guide still in place, what you do is put this through your pilot hole on the skin, and then you run it back through the guide, bolted in place of course, and that keeps it straight, so that the hole you get is the right shape, because of course it's not a round hole. Because the tube isn't going in perpendicular to the surface. If you look at the shape of the hole on the surface, it's not circular, it's kind of oval. So this keeps everything nice and tight. And now, if I've got this right, this is one of our guard stay tubes which have got surface rust, so I'm going to need to clean that up. That should, in theory, that hole should be circular around that tube. So when there's a grommet in there, it'll fill in the gap nicely. These are all going to need sanding down, possibly a little bit of machining, just to make them a nice smooth fit. And I'm actually going to weld little collars. Now that'll be interesting with the grommet. But will I still be able to get it through there? I have to think about that, because at the back you've got the fuel tank here, and I wouldn't want these punching through into the fuel tank. The other thing I could do is weld a plug on the end there, I guess. But what I was going to do is make a little collar and weld that around the tube around here, so it can only go in so far. Yeah, I may need to get a slightly different size grommet for that to work. But that's okay. Even if I don't use grommets, I've got a nice neat hole there now, and those guard stays will look quite good. So I'm going to do the rest using lots of WD-40 as lubricant to cut through the aluminium, and so that the 1/4 inch rod doesn't bind up inside the guide. Turned out the first piece of rod I picked up, that actually is stainless steel. I thought it was silver steel, and so it galled up, and it jammed up as well. You can see where it's torn up the shaft there a bit. But I found a piece of bit of rod out of an old printer or something that worked a lot better. That's actually 6 mil, so it's slightly small, but that made it slightly easier to drill the holes. And you can see what I mean about the holes not being circular. It's one of the little pieces cut out. The other two are reasonably close to circular. I did actually have to drill a little bit through the steel because of the angle for that top hole. Because the body's at such an angle, I hadn't cut enough angle on the I'd cut enough angle on the tube so that it cleared the body, but of course that meant that the hole saw was hitting the tube before it had got all the way through the aluminium. So I had to grind away, well, the hole saw did it for me, a little bit of that tube. So I'll just touch up the paint in there. You won't see any of that, of course. Holes for the guard supports are all in place. I just went around the inside of them with a Dremel, with a sanding drum, and deburred them. Yep, that's deburred. And I've made the tail piece, which just gets screwed in place, and I'll probably use some sort of fender welt just in the edge there, so there'll be like a black rubber strip, just to sort of fill in that little edge. So it'll be something like that. And I was looking at what I've got, and this isn't quite the right sort of stuff, but this is the sort of thing I might use for the boot lid seal. So if you imagine this edge gets wrapped around 180 degrees, and on the inside would be this. So you won't see it because it's just plain aluminium on the top, and then that'll give a little bit of squish to the seal. So that means that this would end up, the boot lid will be sitting just above the surface. So of course I don't have enough of that, so I'll have to order some more, but I'll see what else they've got. But that's the sort of thing I'll do. And because the boot lid edges will wrap 180, this will effectively be captive when it's pushed in place. We have to push it in place and it'll it'll sit there. And like I say, it's not really so much for sealing against water, it's more to seal against or stop the aluminium rubbing on the paint. Basically, it'll scratch the paint off. Thought I'd show this part way. This is my little slotted stick, and I'm using that to bring the edge up. I don't need to bring it up very far, and then I'm using hammer and dolly to bring them up to 90 degrees, and then I will find a suitable strip of something, probably another strip of aluminium, or I've actually used steel rulets before, and put that there and then fold this back over. But I want to leave a gap, about a 1/16 gap, I suppose. Once this has started folding along that line, it's actually really easy just to hammer that flange up. Of course, there is a little bit of shrinking having to happen where it's curved, because it's curving this way. As you bring that flange up, there's too much material, which is why you get these little puckers, and you basically shrink those into each other. So that's coming along. It'll be interesting to see if the shape changes very much. This is where having interesting shaped dollies and bits of metal becomes useful. So I'm able to use this one to hammer this around well past 90 degrees. This is actually a little section cut off this steel block that used to go on there. And this block is something I remember my father having when I was a little kid for years. He's used it to straighten nails, obviously. That's why there's marks all over it. But now I've got it over that far, I should be able to get it to go the rest of the way and leave me that little lip that I want. This edge is now folded around. I used another piece of aluminium, hammered over that. I did have to clamp it. So I'd push it under, clamp it so it wouldn't kick out, and then hammered things. It's a bit rough on the inside, you can see a few hammer marks and things, but that's fine. Like I say, handmade is going to do a lot of heavy lifting on this car, but the truth is it is, so I think it's okay. My edge is a little bit wobbly. Might be able to adjust that with the hammer and dolly. So the next thing to do is make the hole in it for the fuel filler. Now that's going to be interesting. This edge is all hammered around now, and you can sort of see how this is meant to work. Oh, my rubber seal is going to fit up inside there, but I don't actually have enough of it, so I need to order some more. I may need to tweak it, although I think with a bit of silicone or something to lube that up. Silicone spray, actually probably not silicone because I'm going to paint everything, but a bit of KY jelly, something like that. That should slide up into there, and in the corners it'll kind of hold itself because there'll be two pieces there, so I don't think that'll go anywhere. And I measured quite carefully and cut the hole out. I did that with a hole saw and then my hand nibbler to finish the edge, and just sanded the edges. I didn't measure it, I just used a suitable round thing that happened to be this jam jar top, which was about the right diameter. And the reason I've done all that is because I also put the tail on the car today. So I welded up the cracks just around the edges where things had wrapped over, and with head gardener's help we lifted the car onto the chassis. There's one thing I forgot, which is where it sits on top of the rivets. There's a cutout. In the timber there's actually a little depression there, and I forgot to remove the aluminium just around that, so I'll need to take this off and just carve out that little hole so that the rivet actually sits into it. But it's pretty close, it's probably sitting 1/8 of an inch too high. I've also screwed on the tail underside. This again might need a little bit of trimming, but I think what I'll do is I'll put a strip of fender welt in there just to hide that seam, or to fill in that seam. Look inside, you can see the floor. It even says inside, so you don't forget. I hadn't even thought about how you're going to get the bolts in, but luckily you can. You can get your hands in around the side of the petrol tank. You can sort of see the bolts down in there. So luckily there is room there. And so the last thing is that. Needs a little bit of tweaking here and there. I think one of my corners is folded in a bit, so I'll pull that out to get that all sitting flat. But that gives you pretty much an idea of how that's meant to work. And if I measured everything correctly, this should be able to screw on without hitting the bottom. I didn't want it sticking up too far. I think that looks a bit silly. So that'll go there. So it really looks like a car now. I've just sat the doors and taped them in place, but I think you can pretty much get the idea of how that's going to work. They're sitting down at the moment. That's why the gap at the top of the door is too much. They don't sit that low when they're in the car. But yeah, that really gives an idea of the length of the tail. I've definitely ended up with more shape in the back here than there should be, I think. It depends which car you look at, because they are all a little bit different and all the bodies are a little bit different. It's my number plate. I've no idea where that's going to go. Down here maybe. Either that or it has to go on a sort of board here. I probably will need a high stop lamp for this, so I need to think of something there. I think it looks right. It looks like the shocks are going to clear just, which is good. It just clears the front shackle in here. You can see there is not much space there at all, but this shouldn't be moving in and out, of course. It only goes this direction, so that should miss. You do see original cars with little scratches there. I'm sure I've got a picture, at least a replica definitely has. See how the doors will fit. So a bit of tweaking on this, just to get it sitting correctly. You can see the holes for the guard stays in there, down here. I put the seat back in and I actually sat in it to get head gardener's opinion on whether or not you look like you're sitting in the car or on the car. A lot of vintage cars, especially smaller ones like this, or especially Austin 7s, they can look a little bit too small. If you don't look like you're in the car, you look like you're sitting on it. Bit of a noddy sort of car, like one of those kiddies rides. But yeah, like I say, a little bit of tweaking on that boot lid, and then you have to remember it's going to be strapped down, so it's going to pull down, and it should just sit a little bit proud of that and sit on that rubber strip. But, no, I'm really pleased with how that's looking now. I think it definitely looks like a car.